want to do, and the whole idea of hope. Say hope. Hope. And one of the things that have been playing around in my mind when I've been thinking about this, and I know on the back wall it's probably saying at the minute to check your focus. Look at the person beside you and say, check your focus. Okay, so we know what we're going to talk about. You need to check your focus. You need to start thinking about what you're looking at. And I know without a doubt that there are so many people struggle that put a claim on God's promises. You know, we know them, but it's a bit like this. It's a bit like this, and this is our internal dialogue. And we say, well, if I could be sure of me, I could trust Him. If I was sure of me, I could trust Him. It's not that we think that God hasn't spoken promises and won't fulfill them. It's just that we think, well, I'm not so sure about me, so I don't really know how to trust Him. And I want to say this morning, or out of the trap, so to speak, in a race, get your eyes on Him. Get your eyes on Jesus, and get your eyes off your faith or what you've done or what you think you can do. You need to make that shift and that change. Hebrews 12:2, somebody said it. We'll throw it up on the screen later, but just not now. We need to get our eyes on the author of our faith, the perfecter of our faith, and not on our performance or what we've done or how we've engaged that week. Really, I read this story, I thought it was very good. 2010, there's a lady living in South Korea, and she demonstrates the whole idea of perseverance. And she's saying it pays off. Well, what do you mean? Well, after 960 attempts, 69-year-old Cha Sa-soon passed her driving test. Cha took the written test. She took the written test nearly every day. That's over 2.5 years every day to do a written test. Can you believe it? Before she passed the written part of her exam. That's incredible. Then after that, she took another 10 attempts to do the actual on-the-road test before she actually got her license. And I thought, what a woman who sat down and says, I'm getting this thing. I'm pushing through with this. You're not knocking me back. 2.5 years of saying, I'm going to do it today. Oh, failed again, I'll do it tomorrow. Okay. Oh, wow. 960 times. Who would have given up? Come on. You're right. We would have. Couldn't afford it at number one. You ever seen Brian's face? Sorry, Brian, just had to. Absolutely, Brian. She didn't go to Brian. Good job, good job. But it says something, you're right, Brian, it says something about having your eye on the goal and not on things that, like, I just can't go, every time I think about it, this woman, you know, she must have got a block book and full of written tests. I don't know what, but nearly every day. And I want to say, check your focus, and I want to say to me, let's check your focus. And I think it's a great thing when we're walking with the Lord just to check your focus. And I want to read something out of the Old Testament here before we kick off in Habakkuk 3, and it's verses 17 and 18. Really hear what it says. And he's talking about rejoicing. But now, just watch what he does. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor the fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive would fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Now that's a bad picture. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on the high places, to the choirmaster with stringed instruments. And all of a sudden you realize he couldn't have written or couldn't have looked at a more bleaker situation unless he had met Cha Sue and 960 times. But there was nothing that was hope in his life, and he says, I'm just going to keep rejoicing. No matter what happens, I'm going to set my focus. Because here's the truth today, and I want you to catch this. Your thinking leads you to your looking. What you think about will cause you to look in that direction. Your thinking leads to your looking. And when you do that, then your perspective has the ability to knock out God's perspective. And all of a sudden what you see, what you get your eyes on, is telling you how you should live, as opposed to what God has said and what God has promised. So there's something. Do you remember Peter? Anybody remember Peter? Some old people here. But anyway, Peter, he's out in the boat one day and there's a storm. Two of the apostles are with him, and of course there's the storm brews out. And who walks across the water coming in the early hours is Jesus. And of course you know and I know that he's thinking, here's a ghost, but they're in this storm, and Jesus calls him to come on the water, and old Peter gets out, or young Peter gets out of the boat, and he starts to walk on the water in the middle of a storm. And when he's looking at Jesus, everything's kind of cool, and he's got himself together, and then all of a sudden something changes. And you're reading the text, go check it out in Matthew 22, he starts to look at the storm. Maybe he starts to think, well, I'm thinking about there's nothing below my feet here. I have no foundation. I'm in trouble here. But he starts to think on the storm. And his thinking, now watch this, his thinking all of a sudden changes. Where his eyes looking? And he looks elsewhere. And of course, you know how it all works out. He looks away and he starts sinking. And it reminds me of that joke that Johnny told me years ago. What is he thinking about? But I'm not going there anyway. You might know it. And here's what I want to say. Some of you people here today think too much. You think too much. You analyze too much. You're looking for the dot and the stroke over the I and over the T, and you're saying, well, this doesn't work. And you're just focused on your thinking, and your thinking's changing your looking, and you're getting lost because you're thinking so much. Is anybody hearing what I'm saying this morning? Did you think about that? I'm just asking. You see, God's viewing the storm when he's looking at Peter and saying, hey, Pete, it's okay, knock yourself out, chum. And Jesus is saying, just focus on me, look at me, catch me in the eyes. Because there's something in us that intrinsically moves us away from watching and looking at him. And that's when you and I get into trouble. When we forget Jesus, you get this thing called desperation, blankness, thirsty, hungry, lostness. All of a sudden, when our eyes get off them, that's happened. And here's the deal. Jesus was still on the water. Peter was on the water, but he wasn't looking. Jesus was still there. He hadn't moved. Nothing had changed from the minute he got out of the boat until he started to sink. The only thing that changed was where he looked. And well, what a lesson if we just parked up there, but we're going to move on past that and think to yourselves, hey, do you know what? Even when Jesus is here, even when I know that I'm in church and God's here, you're thinking, I need to check my focus on what I'm looking at. Are my eyes on the storm? Or on the Lord? On the one who will actually take me through the storm? Because I think too often we want to give him a bit of a hand. I'm going to read some scriptures. It's actually out of the book of Romans from Paul. Paul comes and he wants to help us shape our idea. And just to let you know where I'm going to go a bit today, we're going to look at Paul because he gives us a cluster of promises. And it's a bit like he's saying, I want you to check your focus. And then I'm going to go and look in the Old Testament of a story of a lady who discovered some things about focus and doing it the wrong way. But I'm going to start with Paul first in a positive light. And I can imagine Paul writing this, and you do know the Bible's a whole conglomerate of messages, isn't that right? Somebody help me out. Say, yes, Lewis. So I can imagine him sitting down to write this, and he's thinking, I'm thinking about Albert, and I'm thinking about Keith, and I'm thinking about, and he said, so I better write these things. Sorry for picking you, because I'm not allowed to pick on Alan anymore. So it's Albert for the first question, Keith the second question, and Alan the rest. Okay, so, but sorry, Alan, I couldn't help myself. So rather than read all the verses, I'm just going to put the question, because Paul's writing and he's thinking it through. Is that okay? Say yes, Liz. So you see, picture this. He's writing and he's thinking about the people in Rome. He's thinking about their internal dialogue, what they're thinking through, how they feel weak, how they've no confidence, how he's thinking these, and he starts to list promises or they tackle their doubts and list promises because it's eroding their faith, it's tackling them. And in 9 verses he gives these 6 superb answers. Are you with me? Yeah. So here we go, Q&A with the Apostle Paul for a second. All right, you with me? Okay, question number 1. Hey Paul, Because imagine he's in the room. Paul, look, I know what you're saying, but and it's kind of cool. I know how you love God, but is God strong enough really to save me? Because that comes along so often in our thought pattern. And in Romans 8:31, this is Paul writing down. He goes, what then? Shall we say to these things, these questions, what you're looking at? If God is for us, who can be against us? Who can be against us? And I'm just wondering, maybe you're here today and you're thinking, there's too much against me. The devil hasn't got you because he's not sufficient enough to get someone who God's got. And Paul's looking at something and he's saying, hey, if you're saying, is God strong enough to save me? Is God unstoppable? Absolutely not. The devil's strong and your flesh might be sneaky, but you've got to understand who Paul's writing to. He's saying God is sovereign. He's over this stuff. And Paul's addressing people and he's saying God is eternal. He's all powerful. He is all knowing. He's a God who loves us. He's a God who has already said it. You can't outsmart God. I know we think it because I hear the prayers. God, you need to do this, and God, you need to do that. God goes, But you can't outsmart him, and nothing can overpower him. Forever. It's never, ever. Have you ever had the thought, what happens if I get to heaven and heaven sort of breaks down? Have you ever thought like that? Just me? Early days as a Christian, what happens, God, if there's another rebellion? What am I going to do? Anyway, get off that. And God says, no, this is forever and ever, for keeps, Lewis, in your language. Question number 2, look at what happens, and let's follow it through. Question number 2, does God really want to save me? Does God really want to rescue me? Does he really, really, really? Because the truth is, God, on the inside, I assume that you really, really, really want to judge me. You're looking to catch me. I really, really, truly feel that. And when I do something wrong, I get so guilty. I get so bad, I have to fix it with you and say sorry 500 times at least. You ever been there? God, I'm sorry. Oh, God, I'm sorry. God, I had that thought again. So I think you're really out to judge me and get me, and you're not there to save me. And then in verse 32, Paul writes, he who did not spare his own son. Come on, just think about it. But he gave him up for us all. He said, hey, I'm giving him up for you. How will he not also with him, with Jesus, graciously give us what? All things, yet we still stumble. Paul's writing to these people and he's saying, you're stumbling because you think God's not going to save you, and it comes out in your mind and then your thought pattern. God says, I want you to catch hold of this. Hebrews 12, let me just read it. It says this, looking to Jesus, check your focus, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. God is all over this for your benefit and for mine. God committed every resource in heaven, the most precious. Jesus, his son, said, hey, I want you to get this on the inside, because this is what bursts hope. And he didn't hold back his son, and he says, just check out your focus on what you're looking at. Because we really live out of it. It's all about me. It's all about how I'm seeing and how I'm feeling. And it's a bit like he's saying, turn away, when he's writing the Romans, turn away from your unbelief, all you Christians in Rome. Turn away from that unbelief that you're living with, that sin of unbelief. Somebody else might put, well, that's really good, Paul. Question number 3. Is there a sin that he won't forgive, Paul? You big tube. No, he wouldn't have said that, but you know what I mean. Is there a sin that God won't forgive? Is there sin that's not covered by the cross? Is there some way that I could get caught out when I get to heaven? Verse 33. Who shall bring any charge against God's elect? Paul's writing this stuff to you and me as well. Who shall bring any charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. You check out, I think it's Romans 4:5, it tells you there very clearly. He said, hey, God justifies those who believe, and he accredits righteousness, boom, right to them. Hey, they're a believer, boom, there you go. So Paul's trying to help people. Jesus was raised from where? Dead. Well done, Keith. I think you're the only person not in the church. Jesus was raised from the dead. In other words, he was raised because God went, accept that sacrifice. I accept that on behalf of everyone. I accept it. If there had been one sin that was left outside of that, Jesus would not have came back from the dead. He would have stayed in the grave. Because he had to deal with every sin. Well, how do you know that? James 2:10. Listen, would you hear what it says? For whoever keeps the whole law and fails in one point becomes guilty of it all. And he's just looking saying, I want to address what's going on in your head because the focus gets mixed up. Somebody else in the crowd might have looked and said, well, Paul, I know what you're saying, or Paul's imagining this taking place, and he says, but will he keep forgiving me? I keep falling into the same sin. I really want to try, but I keep doing the same thing. I keep tripping over my mouth. Keep tripping over my thoughts. Keep tripping over my actions. I think most people struggle. In fact, every one of us will struggle at that level, getting caught in the same difficulties. And this is what happens. You see, when you commit and get caught with something, and I'm not talking about a bad thing. Maybe it's a temper issue. Maybe it's a selfish issue. Maybe it could be anything. But you keep running into it, and you realize this isn't a great thing to be doing, and you feel caught up. And Paul's writing and saying that God can forgive. But you start to think, my promise to change is hollow. I don't believe me, God. And then you think, well, if I don't believe me, how can you believe me? And of course, Paul thinks, I know how to answer that. Verse 34, who is it to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died. He's the one who died. More than that, who was raised, who's at the right hand of God, and who indeed is interceding for us all. Saying, that one's mine, that one's mine, that one's mine. That one's mine. See that crazy numpty, that one's mine. You know, and he's there before the Father. Check your focus, remain faithful, don't let go, because something in your head, you're out of focus, hone in. Question number 5, well, will I have, this is a good one, will I have courage in the hour of persecution when everybody's against me, when the pressure's on? Have I got what it takes? Am I there? 38 and 39, let me just read it to you. Paul writes this, and he says, see, God's faithful. 35, forgive me. This is what he says, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall Mr. Tribulation? Shall Mrs. Distress? So, Mr. Persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? He says, who's actually going to separate you? Who's going to be able to move you away from the love that he wants to bring to you? You see, God gives grace in the moment that you and I actually need it. Peter puts it this way. In 1 Peter 5 and verse 6, he says this, humble yourselves. Humble yourselves. Therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. He's the one that will lift you up. He's the one that will help you live in the place called victory when you stoop. Because sometimes we don't. This is the habit of God, by the way. This is God's habit. It's a holy habit. God says, here's a habit. What do you mean? God's got habits? Yeah. When you bow down, he lifts you up. That's his habit. That's his nature. That's what he does. That's what he put forth, and this is how he lives. He says, listen, if you will be at a place that you'll cast down pride, God says, I will lift you up because you're lowly. It's really important if we just look at him and think, I want to get this thing right. He's saying, my grace is more than enough. Just learn to bow. Just learn to lower yourself. Question number 6. Paul, will I ever be defeated? Will I ever fall down at the end? Will I definitely make it? And that's where we got 38 and 39. What do you hear what he says? For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Paul's saying this, I'm personally convinced, I'm just sold out in this thing. I can't let go of this. I got so much security. I want to list all these promises and all the possibilities that you might think trap you, like the governments, like AI, like the war in Ukraine, or whatever it is. I want to just nail everything and say, hey, God's got this covered. He's saying, nope, I've looked through the promises. There's nothing. There's nothing. But they're doing this in schools. But they're doing this. But this is happening in the world. And God says, ain't stopping me. I've got this thing. And I know we get excited about different things, but God's saying, hey, there's no surprise when you're a Christian for God. There's no surprise before the grave. And there's no surprise after it. It's just great. It's just great. And I know people say, oh, when I go and stand judgment, what am I going to do? What's going to happen? God says, listen, there aren't any surprises, guys. I'm there. I'm there, and I justified you, and I have rolled you up in my love. And I'm going to tell you something else to help people, because they hear this. There's no one on this planet that can curse you when God's blessed you. You really need to hear that, because some of you think the devil's going to get me. That would be an interesting thing. How could the devil ever put his hands on a believer and destroy him? He might wind you up to the point where you won't check your focus and forget what Paul has written. But no one can curse you, or no one can pray against you to pull you down. Well, they can do it, but it's going to have no effect. And that just fills me with hope when I look at that. But I also realize, you see, when I read that, it's really telling me, and I want you to get this, it's not about your power. It's not about your organization. Your power doesn't preserve you. And my power doesn't preserve me. So I think I'm going to take up with, I'm not going to ever ignore his power in my situation. Because too often I think we can go there. See, life's really a journey, and you and I need to tend our hearts. We need to look at our heart and look at the focus on how we lean. Ephesians 2:10 tells us that, hey, we are God's workmanship. Have you ever read it? We are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. I mean, God is just saying, I created you for this purpose. But you know what that means? He said, this is what it's saying when I read that. Hey, guys, you're redeemed. You're really, really redeemed, but I've got to do some work on you. What? Well, you're redeemed, but I'm still working on you. I still got to do something in your world. I've still got to bring change. Paul says this, Galatians 4, until Christ is formed in you, you're on a process, you're on a journey. And he's saying, I want to work with you. I want to work with you. Philippians 2 talks about God who works in you by his power for his good pleasure. God says, I'm working in you for my joy as well as your joy. But of course, this is the thing, life doesn't always look like victory. Sure it doesn't. It doesn't. But those are lots of victory thoughts and lots of great ideas. I'm going to go now into the Old Testament. I'm going to bring a story to you, and the story you find it in Genesis 16 and in 21. And I want to show you someone who didn't check their focus, but they discovered some things when God brought a check to them. Is that okay? So we've looked at Paul writing to a church, and I'm thinking, and it feels like that. But here's someone who just lived life, who didn't check the focus. And I thought it would be important to look at, and thinking leads to looking. Have you ever heard that statement before? The answer is yes, Liz. Yes, Liz. You ever heard that statement before? Yes. So have I. Now here's the story of how it unravels. Abraham and Sarah had a promise, and they had a promise for a child, that's right. And they're waiting on the promise. And it takes a while, and each day goes in. It's a bit like trying to get your driving test in South Korea. It's actually a bit worse, it's longer. But it's not happening. She's not getting the child the promise. So she says, here, Abraham, I have a great idea. Here, or Abram, here is Hagar, my my slave girl, my maid actually, the Lord calls her, why don't you go in with her, and then we can have a baby through her. And here's where I want to go. I want to fast forward a bit into Genesis 21 and 17, and this is what happens. The angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? What troubles you, Hagar? So I've told you a bit about the promise, and I told you where they're going, and they get this woman and say, hey, would you bear a child for us? And she's in the desert, and now I'm going to bring you back to how she got there. So we're going to go to Genesis, if you will, Genesis 16. And I'm going to read you some verses, and then we're going to sort of try and unpack it a wee bit. But keep that in your mind. What troubles you? What troubles you today? What troubles you, Hagar? What's the trouble? What's the problem? 16. Let me see, verse 4. So this is Abraham getting into Hagar. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when he saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress, in other words, on Sarah. And Sarah said to Abram, may the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace. And see, it was a sin no matter what they were doing, because we were working on unbelief, okay? I'm saying this is on you too, you big numpty. May the wrong done to me be in you. I give my servant for your embrace. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abraham said to Sarah, behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. Then Sarah dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. In other words, she dealt harshly. She brought distress. She gave her a hard time. She made it difficult for her. And it's interesting because here we are as this unfolds, and it looks like we're trying to work out and help God with His promise and giving His life. And she's looking in her world and she's going, hey, I've got contempt for Sarah, for my mistress. Why? Because I got one over on you now. And that's what she's doing. She's looking and saying, well, I'm better than you. Well, I'm about to provide for your husband what you couldn't provide. And somewhere she'd missed the point that she was the mistress, and the authority over her, as we read in the story, was Sarah. So she starts digging in and starts to accuse, and she thinks, well, but I still think it's something over you. And it's a bit like the only way I could think about it was like a Moses and Miriam moment, or a Miriam and Moses moment right back in the Old Testament, where Miriam sort of thought, well, I can prophesy like you can prophesy, I can have dreams like you can have dreams, Moses, and then she starts to go down the road of trying to size up and say, I'm going to lord it over you. And what happens? Of course, she becomes leprous. And that's the feel that I had when I was reading that, and I'm going, wow, because she was going, you're no better than me, and she had forgot where she was at, and the baby starts to grow in her. But when the baby starts to grow in her, so did the disrespect. It was this disrespect that starts to take her out and starts to break her life down. Of course, she brings disrespect, and Sarah says, let me reciprocate some of that. Let me just return that back to you. Let me give you some distress and remind you who you are. And all of a sudden, there's this mess that they're living in, because Abraham still preferred his wife, Sarah. She had missed that wee thing. She forgot to check her focus, and she thought, well, I'm going to have my focus on me and what I can do rather than where I'm called and what I'm meant to be doing. And life starts to go wrong. She had a wrong focus. And here's what happened. The first thing happens, her wrong focus reduced her strength. She had no backup anymore. She was alone. I told you, she was sitting in the desert going, what am I going to do in my life? She was totally stripped back from everything that she had before. It had all gone. She had no synergy when the place that she was at, because she was now alone and doing her own thing. And the synergize is a bit like, if I put it in a mathematical term, it's 2 and 2 equals 5. because that's what synergy means. Or 1 and 1 equals 3. In other words, one person can do this amount of work and another person can do that amount of work, but when they come together, they have a greater. When they come together, they can work and they're stronger. And that's where she's caught. Hagar is caught. Her status is gone. She's cut off from her supply. God, the giver. And she's out in the desert. The second thing that happens when you get a wrong focus, or what we learn from her focus took her down the road of separation. Focus will always separate and tell you you're alone. There's no one helping you. It will always take you down there. In verse 6, it talked about her, she run away. It said that she fled because she was in a tough spot. And if you're in a tough spot, the first thing we think of, I'm going to run. We don't think about her focus. We say, I'm just going to run. And that's exactly what she does. She starts to run. And she never got up that morning and planned, I'm going to run away today and end up in the desert. She just never seen what was going to come her way when she started to be in a place of disrespect. So she starts to run away. And where she end up? She ends up in a hot, dry, parched land or a desert. And it just so happens that that desert is her running away and heading back home. She's on a road to Shur, it's called. And that's where she lived, down toward Egypt. And Egypt always talks about slavery, because when you take your own plans, you end up in slavery. She's looking for an old path or an old way that many people walk down. She's clutching at everything she thought she should do. And it was no good, because she wouldn't just start and say, be honest with herself. I need to stop deceiving myself about what's going on. Her focus led her to despair. I don't know, maybe she went to this place because she thought, I'd be found in this road. Because people come. But here's what I like, because when God came, he says, Sarah, what are you doing? And God has came along and said, I want to talk to you, because I know that you're lost. She walked into more lostness because of the way she went, and hopelessness. See, the Bible tells us in Romans 6, and it'll not be on the screen, Hans, don't be looking for it, but it says that which is not of faith, what do you hear, is sin. What? If you're doing something and God hasn't spoken it, it's not faith, so therefore it's sinful. If you take an action and God hasn't told you to do it, all of a sudden you realize, when we read it, Paul says, hey, well, that's actually sin. Because we're meant to be obedient to him, not think, I think I'll do this and get God to bless it, or I'll try this. No, God wants to speak and move us. And when we act in faith and we run with him, God starts to move in our world. So let me look at Genesis 21, just over the page, because you need to look at both sides of this to catch it. In verse 15, 16, she's in the desert. What do you hear what it says? When the water in the skin was gone, Abraham gave her some bread and some water, one of those wee skin things. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child, because she's got Ishmael, and she puts the child over at one point, and she moves away at some paces, puts the child under the bush. Then she went and sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. For she said, let me not look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and she wept. Because the plan and the purpose and everything that she was doing, because her focus was wrong, ended up in tears. Ended up in a bad place. She's waiting on her child dying. It's really sad. She's desperate. It's sad. And as you look at it, you realize, really here in verse 19, now, this really caught me when I was reading it, verse 19. Then God, now remember I told you God called her, starts to talk to her, and then it says this, then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. Then God opened her eyes. And I started to think that well was always there. She probably walked past it. All of a sudden she's seen the provision that God had always made and set it out for, because he loved her and cared for her. The provision was always there. Let me go back to 16. You okay if I go back to 16? Just you hang on to your seat. You'll be all right. Let's just read some further verses before we close. 7 and 8. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness. That was always there, that he sat her by his side. The spring on the way to Shur. So we get it. It was always there. Verse 8. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come from? And where are you going? And she said, I'm fleeing from my mistress Sarah. Where have you come from? Where have you come from? And where are you going? That's pertinent when God says, well, what are you doing? What are you planning tomorrow? And he's going, well, where have you come from? What are you doing? What is it you're planning today? What have you decided to do? What is it that you're setting out in your stall? What you're going to do to sort your life out? And God cares to ask, but he's really saying this, oh, you're going to run at your own plan again. You're going to do your life tomorrow just the way you've done it all, but you're going to plan it, set it out, and chase after it. And God looks, and maybe he's looking at you today, and he's saying, what's your plan? What's your plan? You're just going to do same old, do what you've always done, and then you're going to try to find a blessing, and your focus isn't great, it's on the wrong thing. You forgot about your stay and where you could have been, and you're not even being honest about your lifestyle at the minute, and maybe God just wants to bring you something by way of a revelation. And then let me move on to the last thing I wanted to share with you, because all of a sudden Hagar discovers something. She's realized wrong focus on where it leads. We've realized that it reduces her strength and her ability. It causes her to be separated. And then it says this right here, right focus. And this is what, when you're reading the text, the right focus is regained by submission. Did you say the word submission? I did. It's regained by submission. Verse 9, as you look in the text, would you hear what it says? The angel of the Lord found her in the desert right beside the provision, and says this. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress. And what's that say? You mumbled that? Wonder could we get it a wee bit louder? The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and... I know we don't like it, but this is what he's saying. We read it earlier on in the New Testament. He's saying, humble yourself. Humble yourself. This is what the Lord's saying. Now hear me. Hagar, let go of you trying to control your world and get me to bless you and find a different way. He's saying, you better stop this, because it's never going to help you. You've got great ideas, they're just not my ideas. You've got a plan, but I'm not going to be blessing, and you need to understand what I'm doing with you. Because the truth is, there she's out, she's away from her mistress, we already know that she was an authority over her, and this is what's happening, and God's bringing her attention to, and this is what I want you to catch. Her blessing was attached to Abraham's house. The blessing was attached to Abraham's house. And that's where she needed to have her faith. Hey, it doesn't matter what I'm facing and the duress I'm under, this is where I must stay. Why? Because blessing's attached to it. What does it say in verse 10? God says this, the angel of the Lord said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. I'm going to take the Ishmael and I'm going to cause a blessing to move through him for you. And then in verse 11, I'm really here with this, and this is the important part that we're going to discover. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call his name, say it, Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. And of course, you and I know that Ishmael is a very interesting name, because it's a bit secret. Can you imagine when he's growing up? Hey, Ishmael, Ishmael, because Ishmael means God hears. So she's going out and it's dinner time. She's going, God hears, God hears. It's dinner time. Or it's breakfast time. God hears, God hears. Ishmael, I'm going to slap your backside because you're not home in time. But God hears. Well, I know he does. But you see, there's something that God's doing, and he's wanting you and I to catch hold of this concept under duress. That the Ishmael in your world is God saying, name the child that I hear. Because many of us at many different times don't have a God who we believe actually hears, because he doesn't change our plan or our purpose. So then we get agitated and we get annoyed and we start to shout a bit and get frustrated, and God's going, hey, I hear you. Got it once, first time. First thought you had, I heard. God doesn't miss this. God's not coming behind. And he's saying, hey, Ishmael, he says, yeah, God hears. Verse 13. Let's just go on. So she called, there's that thing called the boy. And then it says, so she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees. It's not up there. Have a guess. You are the God who sees. Yeah, me. There you go. Some people have the Bible open. So she says all of a sudden, she's looking and saying, hey, I'm going to call him Ishmael because God hears. And then I'm going to realize that you're the God who sees me. So she calls the boy, then she calls God. She starts to name things around her, starts calling things that are not as though they are. And all of a sudden, life starts to burst forth in her. And I love this in verse 14, and it says this. When I find it, therefore the well was called, and I love this because it's directed at a friend of mine, Belaharoy. Sorry, it's not his beer, Laharoy. You watch yourself, Roy. Therefore the well was called. So the boy was called, God was called, and the place that she was called something. It was a confession of her heart that she learned, because she got herself in line and thought, I'm going to go the right way because this is the right way to go, and God wants to be blessing. However low you feel, however distant you may feel you're at, God promises you and I a future by saying, hey, I hear you, I see you, and the place you're in is blessing commanded and a future for you. And this is how he's looking at her, so we can go on trusting. And by the way, the submission thing, to let you know, it's not a place where you abandon all hope and say, oh, I better go and do this. It's a free thing. God, I gladly submit to you in this situation that I find myself. And that's how she starts to find nearly like a double strength, and through faith and through prayer and through calling upon him. Here's another takeaway, if I can. I think I've got a couple of seconds left. So what do you hear? And I want you to catch this, mummies and daddies and grandads and grannies and kids that have just been born. In Genesis 21. I just wanted for this in verse 9. Will you hear what it says? No, it's not that. Can't be that. 21 and 9. When is it 21 and 19? I'm not going to share that with you because I can't find the verse. I'm not going to share that with you. But this is where it is. I can't find it. I'm not going to search it. I don't have time. It might be 21 and 14. But this is what it says. It says that when Isaac, the promised child, was born, Sarah comes in and she finds, really here, Ishmael mocking the child, Isaac, the promised child. Because he, Ishmael, had grown up, and somewhere maybe in Hagar she hadn't dealt with maybe just everything that was in her life, and she trained her son to mock and laugh at other people. And I just thought about the takeaway of that, because what you do today and how you live your life in front of your children, in front of your grandkids, they are copying and learning and imitating. And I'm just wondering, do your children, are they following the God that you profess and the one that you want them to? Because there's no good coming later. I'm just sort of saying, who's watching you? Because actions speak louder than words, guys. And they do watch, and actions give extra meaning to the words that you speak. So that's really important. I think God's saying, be faithful. Be a faithful witness. Especially with your words, especially with your action. But with your words, make the confession because your confession has power. God hears me. You're the God who sees me. And you're the God who set a place for me that I can receive from you. So Hagar sitting alone in the desert, all alone. She's weeping. She's lost. And somehow she starts to get this revelation. He hears me when no one else hears me. He sees me when no one else sees me. You know, when she submitted and done what God said, there's no record that Sarah gave her a hard time anymore. Nothing. And I think that speaks. And the one who sees and the one who hears when nobody else does doesn't change, guys. You don't need someone to say and come and rap your door, because he sees and he hears. He's not deaf and he's not blind. So the first thing that I want you to catch as we're going today, and all the things that were said, God hears, number one. Ishmael, God hears. Number two, he's the God that sees me. And number three, he's the God who has a place and a well of living water because he sees you. Let's stand to your feet as the worship team come on. I'm going to read something else just because it's in my head. If you can take hold of one of those things today, God hears, God sees, and God's got a well of life for me. The psalmist wrote this: I'm going to declare your steadfast love in the morning and your faithfulness at night. I'm going to declare that. That's a lifeline to you and me. I'm going to do that. I'm going to declare this because it gives me hope. It gives me strength. And maybe if I declared it, you would declare it. Maybe we would declare it. Maybe we would start to speak that. It's him, he's faithful. He's just faithful. He's just totally faithful. He's never going to change. He's always going to respond. He's always working with us. Will you allow God to unravel you? Would you allow God to deliver you rather than running to your own plans? Would you let him surround you even now? Could he surround you? Could he whisper to you today, I hear you, and not only do I hear you, I see you. And I'm making this moment of place where there's a well of life that can touch you. Close your eyes and lift up your hands.